Let's go to NBC's Ali Rafa, who is at the White House. Also with us, NBC's Vaughn Hilliard, also the host of Woke AF, Danielle Moody, and as well, former Representative Charlie Dent. We're going to start with you, Ali, at the White House. The president has a very busy and crucial day. How does it look?
Yeah, Richard, it really cannot be underscored enough how high the stakes are for the president today, with all eyes, but especially the eyes of Democratic donors, Democratic lawmakers on Capitol Hill on the president, watching every move he makes, every word out of his mouth as he travels to Wisconsin today. And really that extra attention started last night during this 4th of July barbecue that the White House held, in which the president tried to remind Americans of what is at stake in the 2024 election. Listen to some of his comments here.
We have to look at ourselves and ask the question, will we stand for freedom again? We stand for democracy. We stand together as Americans. I believe we will and we can. We got to just remember who the hell we are. We're the United States of America. Whoa.
As you mentioned, Richard, one part of the day is going to be dedicated to this rally in Madison, Wisconsin. And then we know that the president will sit down with George Stephanopoulos for that interview with ABC News that's expected to air in full in primetime tonight at 8 p.m. So lots and lots of eyes on that interview. I think the big questions now are whether the damage done from that poor performance at last week's debate is irreversible, and really whether the president, even though he's remaining defiant, he's saying that he is staying in this race to win it, whether he's up for this challenge and whether this extra attention, these extra eyes on him inevitably possibly force him to make a misstep or have any of those gaffes, Richard.
Ali, how is the campaign responding to the question, what if the performance does not turn out as good as they had hoped it to be?
Yeah, the Biden campaign is preparing for a long haul effort. They announced this morning that the president, the vice president, the second gentleman, the first lady, they will all go to every single battleground state this month, campaigning on the record of this administration. And the Biden campaign is hoping that at least that will start to ease these growing concerns among Democratic lawmakers, among voters, among the donors who have pulled out funding and are shifting more to races in the House and Senate. The question now is whether the president can deliver, whether any possible misstep will set the campaign back on this effort, Richard.
Vaughn, for former President Trump, how is he handling, how are they strategizing what may happen today in the coming days? We certainly have heard comments over the last couple days.
Right, largely over social media. He's had no public events here over the course of this weekend. He has rallies in Florida as well as in Pennsylvania over the next week. But for Donald Trump, to a certain extent, he has not gone on for any TV interviews. He has sort of allowed this storyline and Joe Biden and the Democrats' efforts to regain control of their own situation to play out. Now, when you're talking about this interview here today, of course, the social media account of Donald Trump is always a good place to go to track where his thoughts are at. And that is exactly what he's done over the last 24 hours. If you look, he's not only taken on and attacked the individual doing the interview, George Stephanopoulos of ABC, but in another post, he made it clear by saying, quote, let's do another debate, but this time no holds barred, and all on discussion with just the two of us on stage talking about the future of our country. Of course, there is just two debates that were agreed to by these two camps. It was Donald Trump for months who was making the claim anytime, anywhere. And that led to the Biden campaign agreeing to that first debate, early debate in June. But they do not have the second debate, which was agreed to, until September. So Donald Trump looking to drive home and stick in the idea that he would be eager to make himself available to go on TV with Joe Biden sharing the stage with him. Of course, there is, again, nothing slated in that element until September, though, Richard.
And Danielle, the president really addressing at least three groups, those on the base, those who are absolutely behind him, those who have some questions, and you have the independents, certainly. That's why he's in Wisconsin. What can he accomplish today?
I mean, look, I wish that we had a lot more scrutiny on on the things that Donald Trump has been saying, with in fact that he's saying that he wants to be a dictator on day one, that the Supreme Court on July 1st gave him the ability to do that, and how dangerous the Trump administration 2.0 could be for this country and for our democracy wholeheartedly. People have bad debates. Joe Biden is not the first president to have had a bad debate. I'm not too old to have remembered when Hillary Clinton had the flu on the 2016 campaign trail, and that's all the media could talk about, right? And so the focus here needs to be on Project 2025 and the reimagining of America through a conservative lens that does not see all Americans as a part of that project. And so it's really important for this president to nail that home and move the conversation away from him and move it to what kind of future we want America to have.
You know, Charlie, working off of what Danielle said there, when we were looking at some of the reporting coming out of The Guardian and the AP, they had outlined 11 statements, that were incorrect, made by the former President Trump, and 6 made by President Biden. Why haven't Democrats been able to necessarily get that message out? The focus certainly being on President Biden, and can he, if you will, dig himself out from that performance a week ago?
Well, look, everybody knows that Donald Trump, it makes a lot of wild, erratic statements. This is nothing new. I mean, many voters are looking at this race right now as one candidate who may be incapable and the other unimaginable. And even prior to this debate, nearly 2/3 of Americans thought one candidate was too old and the other too dangerous or crazy. The debate simply validated and confirmed that feeling. And frankly, I'm down here at the Jersey Shore. And this area at this time of year is populated by a lot of people from Pennsylvania. And I got to tell you, I haven't run into one person who thinks Joe Biden should continue running. They might say he shouldn't run again, or they'll say they're not sure if he can run again, but nobody's saying he should go forward. People need to get out of this Washington bubble. That debate was not simply a bad debate. That was a meltdown, an epic meltdown, catastrophic. This election is not about the last 4 years. It is about the next 4 years. And many ordinary Americans in swing states who aren't in the tank for one candidate or the other are saying they're not sure this guy can do the job for the next 4 years.
Vaughn, how is the Trump campaign dealing with some of the criticisms coming across from the actualities that I just described, that the former president had misstated many particular facts that were important to his platform?
Number one, they don't retract any statements that Donald Trump makes. That's not something that they do. And I think that this is where it comes down to the fact that, to a great degree, the American public has become numb or immune to the fact that Donald Trump lies. We know that there was acknowledgement among voters that Donald Trump is somebody who does not stick to the facts of a situation, or muddies, or, in the case of January 6th, makes assertions about responsibility for the attack and actions that he did, in fact, actually take around the event that is pretty well stated and understood, the events that happened that day. Yet for Donald Trump, that is not that is not politically advantageous to him. And so he has found it, and frankly has had little political brushback outside of losing the 2020 election for making statements like that. So right now, when he sees polling for him where he does, he sees little reason to veer away from the types of characterizations of events, even if they are in fact not accurate ones.
Danielle, as we look at what the president may say today, how are you going to be looking at his interview?
I mean, I'm going to be looking at his interview for what I've constantly been looking at Joe Biden to do, to fight for the American people, to tell us what is at stake in this election, to make it be beyond a vanity project about who is too old or who doesn't walk right or who trips or who stutters. The fact is that our democracy is on the line. The world is watching. And when we now have a Supreme Court that has said that the next president can function as a king, and you're giving that king power to a 34 counted felon, I think that everyone in America should be concerned, should be terrified as we make it to the 4 months that we have down the line until the election. So I'm looking for the president to give that strong conviction of a defense of American democracy.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.